I was particularly privileged to have been invited last year to deliver the 12th lecture in memory of President John Evans Atta Mills. And as I said at the time, it was strange how of all the friends he had, heads of states and so on, some people decided that I was qualified to give that lecture. And I'm so grateful, that I was given that privilege, which clearly I didn't deserve, Now, Professor Mills is an extraordinary personality. I mean, he's not a Marxist as I am. He's not a socialist. He doesn't believe in socialism. Indeed, he's an extremely religious person. He's an evangelical Christian, even to the extent that he would not tolerate African traditional religious worship and so on. He had all those problems. But he was an extraordinary person who gained your respect if you came into contact with him. And it was almost instant, And I like to tell just one or two stories. And the first story is about his confrontation with the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, which gained international attention.
Yeah.
And he told the British Prime Minister that the British Prime Minister had no right whatsoever to make decisions for Ghana. And that the Ghanaian people will make their own decisions based on their felt needs, their cultural imperatives, and so on. And that David Cameron should concentrate on Britain and leave Ghana for Ghanaians, and so on. And that was so impressive. At the time that many African leaders were lying prostrate, before the colonial metropolis and so on, that was Mills standing up to the British Prime Minister and telling the British Prime Minister virtually to go to hell. You understand? And it impressed me so much. That was an aspect of Mills. That was an aspect of his character. You understand? What endeared him to many people, his honesty, and the fact that he feared nobody and so on. That was a very important aspect of the Mills story. The other story had to do with a function he performed. I think it was the first official function, which was the inauguration of the JA plant pool at Jowolo. I mean, everybody, there were many stories in the newspapers and so on about Zoom Lion and its leader, Mr. Ejapon. And the story had been that it was an NPP-sponsored enterprise. So there was a lot of anger against Zoom Lion in the NDC. Many people wanted his business destroyed and so on. And when Mills became president, he had an invitation to inaugurate JA Plant Pool, which was part of the Zoom Lion chain of companies and so on. And he said, I'm going to do it. And he said, it doesn't matter whether he was MPP or CPP or whatever. He's a Ghanaian businessman who has to be encouraged. And President Mills went there. That became his first official assignment. And I was so very impressed. And what even impressed me more was that the president arrived for the ceremony in a 3-car convoy. Unbelievable. 3-car convoy. And saloon cars. He was using saloon cars, 3 saloon cars. The modesty was clear. It was so very clear. And there are many stories. I mean, he was my friend. Everybody knew that he was my friend. Very close friend. Everybody knew that. And his telephone was accessible to everybody. I mean, taxi drivers could call him and he would pick. People he never knew could call him and have conversations with him. So if you go out there into the public domain, the number of people who had telephone conversations with him that he didn't know and so on were so many. That was interesting. And then one day I get a call from President Mills. He used to call me quite a lot. So one day he called me, and I entered his I don't know what to call it. Everybody knew that he was living in the castle. But he was living in a very small room in the castle. I don't know if you ever went to his place.
No, not his room.
Okay. I had the privilege of going to his room. Very small. He had one bed in that room. Even space to walk around the bed was a problem. There was no space to walk around the bed. And then there was a wardrobe. That's all. So if he heard that President Mills was living in the castle, you might think that he was living in comfort. And so he was living in one small room. And then that small room had an adjoining hall, which is about a quarter of the studio, with one sofa and 2 chairs. That's all. So when I got there, President Mills said, Kwesi, can you imagine what is happening to me? So I thought he was sick or something. I was really worried, So can you imagine what is happening to me? So I said, Prof, what's the matter? He said, this morning one of my friends came here and offered me a house, gave me keys to a house and said it was a gift. And he said he was shocked. And he asked his friend, so when you were coming, all the beggars on the streets who have no places, if you didn't see any one of them, you passed all of them and came and offered me the key to a house as a gift. And he said he already had 2 houses. And that it was his headache. Every year he had to find painters to go and paint 2 houses. Now this friend is coming to add another one. So instead of looking for painters to paint 2 houses, you have to look for painters to paint 3 houses. That was Professor Mills. I mean, an incredible, modest gentleman. And the stories about him are so many. And all of them tell you who he was. Maybe I should tell this last story. I'm sitting on Radio Gold, and I'm having a dig at a minister that I thought had completely misbehaved, And I go after this minister, I tell the story, and so on. As soon as I left the studio, my phone rings, and it's the president. So I pick it and say, Kwesi, how can you be attacking this gentle minister? What has he done to you? What's the problem? I said, Prof, he hasn't done anything to me. I think that he's not doing his work properly and so on, And I said, no, I don't believe you. I have full confidence in this minister. So I start an argument with the president. He says, okay, don't let us argue on the phone. Whatever you're doing, stop it and come to the castle immediately. So I drive straight to the castle. I'm ushered into his presence, and he says, what is the problem with this minister? So I start explaining. And he's sitting there quietly listening. In the middle of my explanation, he walks out. Those of you who knew his office, he walked out into where his ADC was. Yeah. And then came back gently and sat down and said, continue. And I was continuing. In a few minutes, the minister walks in.
Yeah, that's how it is. That was your
In a few minutes, the minister walks in. And I says, Kwesi, this is the minister you're complaining about. Tell me the story in his presence. You could not gossip to Mills.
No.
He didn't believe in rumor. No. So I told the story. Then when I finished, he asked the minister, is that true? The minister was waffling all over the place and so on. Then Mills said, but everything you're saying confirms what Kwesi is saying. The next time you do that, I will sack you.
Yeah.
That was Mills. That was Professor Mills. An extraordinary gentleman. Gentle. He was gentle, considerate. He loved his people. Maybe I should tell the last story. Mills was always holed up in the castle. He had a house somewhere in Regimanua. Yeah. More comfortable places. But he was always holed up in the castle. So one day I asked him, I said, why don't you go home? President, why do you hide in this small cubicle and so on? Just go home and relax. I said, Kwesi, I don't want to disturb people. If I have to drive in the morning to the office and drive in the evening back home and so on, the siren I'll be disturbing people, I'll be disturbing traffic and so on. So I like to come here, that is the castle, Sunday when there's nobody, Sunday night when there's no traffic, when I don't disturb anybody, come and sit here. And I stay here till Saturday night when I can go home quietly without disturbing anybody. The president did not want to use the siren because he didn't want to obstruct traffic. He didn't want to disturb. Today, I'm sure that two of you when you were coming, the number of sirens which tried to push you off the road and so on, even the president didn't want that.
Yeah.
So that was Mills, and we will forever remember him. You know, even though he was not a socialist, he had a passionate belief in Nkrumah and Nkrumah's, government and so on. And sometimes I wondered what the basis was, but he believed so much in Nkrumah, even though he was not a socialist like Nkrumah and so on. And he restored, you remember that Nkrumah's, there had been problems with observing Nkrumah's birthday and so on. He came and started the restoration process and actually set up a committee headed by Professor Akilakpa Sawyer to plan the centenary anniversary of Nkrumah and so on. So, Prof, we will miss you. You were a wonderful president, wonderful friend, wonderful leader, and so on. And we will forever miss you.